Hey there, welcome to That Photo Thing. My name's Tommy, and I'm sorry that I haven't posted in the last month or so. I originally had a nice flat wall in my house that I was using as a cool backdrop, as you saw from everything else. Nice blank backdrop to use. But we've been doing some remodeling in my house, so things have been changing, and I haven't really had an ability to find a place to set up the camera for these YouTube videos. So I've been kind of out for a month anyway. But now we're in my backyard trying out this as a backdrop for tonight. And the reason why I wanted to make a video for the month is not only to start back up on my 1st and 15th video series, but I also want to add things besides the photo exercises. Also, I want to start adding tips and tricks and little habits to get into to try to improve what you're doing with the gear that you have and the passion that you have for photography. One of the little things that we're going to talk about today is a simple mistake that cost me today about 10 photos out of the entire photo shoot. It was literally the very first pose that I took this morning, and it caused me to lose those photos. And it's one of those silly mistakes that could definitely have been avoided, and so that's why I want to share with you today that don't make the same mistake that I've made. So we're going to talk about it. So first off, there's this thing called chimping. Now what chimping is when you're having your camera and you take a photo, and as soon as you take a photo, you look on the back to see what the photo looks like. Then you take another photo, you look at the back to see what the photo looks like. The more you do this, lots of factors happen, especially when you're shooting with models. They're going to start losing interest. They're going to lose confidence in you. They're going to lose confidence in themselves, thinking maybe they're not posing right, maybe they're posing something they're not happy about. And also they're going to think of yourself as a not confident photographer because you're constantly checking, hoping that it's the photo that you want, right? So chimping is a very bad habit to get into. Plus it wastes a lot of time. You're constantly doing this, you're draining the battery, looking at the image review and everything else. So I'm in full agreement with the rest of the YouTube community and every photography class I've ever heard of that says don't do chimping. Chimping is bad. Take your image review off. So you go in your settings of your camera, turn your image review off so that when you take a photo, it doesn't immediately pop up on the back of your camera's LCD screen demanding attention from you. That's a good habit to get into. I completely agree with that, to keep your image review off. And then you could just take a photo and move on to the next photo. I would like to modify the no chimping rule though, because I feel for DSLR users, you're going to want to chimp for the first handful of test shots. So you take that because you're using an optical viewfinder, so you're just seeing real time what's coming into the lens, which is nice in a lot of scenarios, but then your settings, you have to then play with your camera settings. So maybe your exposure's too dark, or maybe you thought you got the aperture that you wanted and now it's a blur out that background, and it's just too much detail in the background. So it's good to take test shots and actually chimp then. So take that photo, look at the back of your camera, change your settings, take that photo, etc., etc. And then when you get the settings that you want, then stop that. Turn the image review off, or just use the image review button when you're doing that test shot set anyway, and then keep your image review off and let it ride. I feel like that's a really great idea for a DSLR user, just to have that nice workflow and make sure they get their settings right so they don't have any problems with what they want, or they're not spending a ton of time online editing them in Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever thing you use, Capture One, things like that. For a mirrorless camera, I have a little bit more of an advantage because you get to see in real time the exposure through your electronic viewfinder or through the LCD on the back. So you get to play with your settings, play with your camera, and get the settings correctly before you ever even take a shot. And what's cool about that is then you can use the image review less. You can do this a whole lot less. In fact, the best time with that is you just want to like use that to check focus. And for the most part, you won't need to chimp at all, because you could even just hold the camera to your eye and look in the camera and see what you're doing. So that's where I feel like chimping is good, is for test shots when you're starting before your shoot even happens, just to get some test exposures. And then when you're actually in the process of shooting, then you don't look at the photos, because you're wanting to be more real and present in the time with the model that you're photographing. With, you know, say you're photographing wildlife, that's still technically something that you are in the moment with, witnessing for the first time, or maybe the 100th time, who knows. But it's a magical moment that you get to experience something with wildlife. So you don't want to be taking that photo and making sure you got the right wildlife photo. You want to take that photo with full confidence that you have the good composition that you want, and you have the good exposure that you want, which you kind of set up previously through the chimping. Now you don't have to chimp while you're actually in the action doing the thing that you're trying to do. Same thing with a model. When you're interacting with the model, you're making the model feel comfortable. A comfortable model makes for really good photos, nice poses, things like that. So you don't want to be constantly like disconnecting from that model to verify your photos. So I am a firm believer of a lot of the rules and guidelines that people are saying of how to avoid chimping and to stop chimping by looking at the back of your screen over and over and over again. But now we're going to get to the point where I was saying that I lost a group of photos, 10 photos from today's shoot. So I was doing a photo shoot with a bunch of models from a dance troupe that's based out of Florida called Groovolution. They're a dance troupe that you can find on groovolutionentertainment.com, and they provide all sorts of circus acts and fire acts and all sorts of fun things. I'm actually wearing one of their shirts right now of a fire dancer on here. And what they have is they have a Christmas themed photo shoot that they wanted me to photograph today. And I've shot for them hundreds of times, and I've taken hundreds of pictures for them in various scenarios and various costumes and action shots and things. I really enjoy portrait photography for dancers. It's a lot of fun. It's probably one of my more, like, I'm a wildlife photographer and a macro photographer first, and that's my main hobby, but I wound up getting more into portrait photography because I like photographing dancers. So naturally, when I'm working with these dancers this morning, I had 30 people in a group photo, and that's a lot of people. Well, not 30 actually, I think it's more like 20, but still 20 people in a group photo. There's a large group photo. And so what I have to do whenever it's a big group photo like that is I have to do what's called focus stacking. I take a picture in different spots up the group photo and get that layer of focus as I go up. And then combine the 3 of those or 5 of those, however many I take, and put them all together in Photoshop so the whole group photo is in focus and I don't lose anybody in like the bokeh. So so I was doing that, and they wanted me to actually be in the first photo. I'm also one of their dancers, so they wanted me as part of the shot, and I'm usually the one taking the photos and not being in the photos too much. So it wound up being kind of not only nerve-wracking because I now had to leave my camera to try to auto take it on its own, but I had to make sure I was posing even though I wasn't. I was more concentrating on the photo. So it was a little bit of a struggle. And so I foolishly tried out an app. I'm not even going to mention the name on the app because it's just a terrible app. I really don't think the app should have ever existed. What the problem with the app is, it doesn't update as much as it should. And what it does is it overlaid, or it tried to at least, overlay on top of my camera's wireless communication app. So the wireless trigger would then be triggered by this app that overlaid on top of it. So then it would take the 3 photos for me when I hit it with my normal wireless trigger. So after some fiddling with it and I wanted to try this out at least for the first pose, or at least for the big group shots. All the smaller group shots I could just take myself with my camera, and I don't have to be in them, and that's fine. But the large ones, I was going to be in them, so I wanted to get that focus, and I wanted those shots to go on their own, so I didn't have to delay, because a lot of people move and shift, and I needed to hurry up and take all 3 photos to stack them together nicely. So the app sounded like it was going to work. We did some testing. Me and my friend did some testing with them. I didn't have an assistant this morning, so it was just another dancer friend of mine, and he was trying to get the app to work with me, and we got the app to work and did a bunch of test shots the day before and the morning of, and it took the photos and didn't seem like it was going to be a problem. There's a little bit of hiccups here and there of like trying to figure out like the points to put on my wireless trigger and have my wireless trigger actually listen to that properly. But then afterward it was working. We heard the camera shutter actuate. We saw the focus on the lens actuate, and on the app it was showing the order of operations going through when you actually started it. So everything seemed fine. So we foolishly trusted it and decided to go with it for this shot so I could actually be in the photo. So I got into the photo and I set it up on the phone and we programmed the thing. We fired it away and we heard my camera shutter click, shutter click, shutter click for the 3 photos that it was supposed to take. So we stayed in that pose and I did it like 3 times. So it took about 9 or 10 photos, and we were like, okay, that was good. Let's change poses, because again, I don't chimp anymore. I don't look at the back of the camera anymore because my settings are good. I'm using a mirrorless camera, so I already spent all the time to get the settings correct and the settings working the way I wanted it to. So yeah, we were fine. So let's move on to the next pose. It's not my first time trying this out. It was my first time doing that many people at once in a group photo. So that's why I wanted this app to begin with, because I wanted to try to ensure that I'm not delaying by me fiddling with the phone app, by just having it fiddle with itself. This is a funny thing to say. But yeah, so I was pretty confident that it was going to be working, and it seemed like it was working, especially with the shutter actuating and everything. So then we moved to the next pose. Well, the next pose that we moved into, I didn't have to be in it. So I got out and I took the photos. So we got a nice, 20-person deep photo without me in it. And because I took the photos like I always do, I'd take 3 photos so I could stack them together. And then we moved on and we did smaller groups and individual portraits and had a nice long photo shoot morning until the sun got too bad to shoot in, and then, went home, ate, and took a nice nap and everything else. And here I am. I pop my SD card into the computer and I look at all the photos. And it turns out the whole first photos, the ones I used on that app, the app just simulated taking the photos. It didn't actually activate the sensor on the camera. So for whatever reason, it moved focus, it activated focus, and it moved shutter, but then the photos didn't get taken. So the first 10 photos of the first, which was the whole first pose, are not on my camera. Now granted, the other 300 photos, they're fine, they're great, everything's okay. So it wasn't an SD card issue, it wasn't a camera recording issue, it was literally an app. The app was telling my camera to do something and then forgetting to tell it to do something else. Now, that's because I could have easily avoided losing those 10 photos if I had at least reviewed the photos sometime during the shoot. And that's where I feel like I want to modify the chimping rule. I want to say that either at the end of every pose that you're doing in a photo shoot, or sometime in the middle of that particular subject pose that you're doing in that photo shoot, just stop, hit the image review button, and just scroll through your photos really quickly and make sure you got your exposure correctly, your composition correctly, and see if your focus is okay. I know, especially for mirrorless camera users, you get to see all of that in real time. So I fell victim to, oh, I saw it all. I know it's doing its job properly, fine. So yeah, but there was one extra step that I didn't check because I didn't hit that image review button, and that was whether or not it even went to the card in the first place. If an SD card ever actually fails on you, which is a very rare thing nowadays, SD cards are becoming more and more reliable, and then there's things like CFast Express and XQD and a whole bunch of other guys like that. Those other cards are even more reliable than SD cards now, but SD cards very rarely fail on you. But it can happen, and if it does happen, your camera usually tells you. It puts up a big message and says, hey, I got a problem. So there you will know for a fact. But in the case of this is a very unusual situation and circumstance, and I was just way too complacent to even think to look at the back of the card. Like, oh, I got my exposure right, I heard the shutter go off, I got my composition right, I got my focus stacked so I don't have to worry about getting my focus right. I know it's right because I got it right in at least one of those slices. So yeah, I just moved on, and I lost those photos. I never actually had them. I could have, if I had looked at the back of my camera, hit that image review button and just briefly scrolled through on that pose to make sure I got what I liked, then I could have been like, oh, they're not here. Everybody get back to that same spot. So obviously it wasn't a big deal because, if it was a huge fail, I would have titled this YouTube video more like, oh, I failed big time. But it was just one of those like silly oops kind of situations that wound up being, just, oh well, I guess I lost a pose, and the other 30 poses or so are fine. So that's just a little tip, is I would say chimping is still a pretty bad thing to do. It's a pretty bad habit to get into. Don't keep looking at the back of your camera. Don't keep, making sure everything's right every 5 seconds. But do take a moment and just pause somewhere within a point where you consciously know is a relatively decent stopping point, where you can just hit the image review button, scan through your photos, and make sure you get make sure you can see if there's any silly mistakes that you could have been like, oh, I wish I had, oh, I need to reshoot this because I don't know, accidentally hit the ISO button too many times and now the exposure is way blown out. Like, oh, let's reshoot that really quick. When you're on location, just briefly look at that. So that's about it. Hopefully you'll enjoy this video. Hopefully you'll get something out of this video. I had a very weird scenario. This is my first time in 5 years of shooting. Yeah, 5 years of shooting that I've actually had a weird situation where I lost a couple photos. So I figured I'd talk about it. So hope you enjoy. Hope you get something out of this. And have a good night. And we'll talk to you the next time. And I'll probably put up an exercise next time. Sorry if this ran way too long. I'm just kind of talking, and I'm just talking about it now while it's still fresh in my mind, so I'm just rambling. So, yeah. Anyway, I'll put up an exercise next video, and I hope you have a good one. Happy December.